Hello, happy August 23rd. Welcome to our HR Huddle. With me is Samantha Mansfield, and I'm glad to be here. Hey, Sam, thanks for
Hi.
joining me.
Oh, thank you. Glad to be here.
So today we thought we would talk about personality assessments. And one of the things that we get asked about from HR professionals and leaders in firms is, what are some tools that we can use to understand, people's, strengths and how to best leverage them in our team, and also build some empathy and teamwork, across our teams. And we think the personality assessments is one of the best tools to be able to do that. It provides insights, and it doesn't matter which one you use. I guess maybe I should start there. Is there's a lot out there, and we have found that they're pretty consistent and just kind of portray personality preferences a little bit different, depending on whether you use Myers-Briggs or DISC or Strengths Finders, which focuses on strengths, or Colby. Did I say predictive index? There's all kinds of them that are out there. And we tend to mostly use Myers-Briggs. Probably second to that is DISC. I think, predictive index and Colby might be right behind that. We know there's others, but we like Myers-Briggs because one of the premises that they have for personality assessments is that there's not a right, or perfect personality. And we'll talk a little bit more about that, especially as it pertains to the accounting profession. And as we're adding more consulting and advisory to our profession, what that looks like. But we also like it because it talks about your innate preferences, like how you're wired, like it's in your DNA, but it's not fixed. And so that's one of the ways that we like to use it, or why to use personality assessments, because it gives you insight about yourself and how you're wired and what your natural preferences are. But then also to gain some empathy and understanding about how your team members are wired. And we like to joke and say, and they're not wired just to irritate you, because they do things or they approach things differently. It really, I think, helps to say, gosh, how can we capitalize on the diversity in our team? We're talking a lot about diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I think one of the diversity elements, a big one, is personality differences. And so I think gaining that, empathy and understanding of how you operate, and then how others operate, and then how can we, leverage those differences, and then also maybe moderate. If Samantha and I are working on something, and her approach to decisions or her approach to the project is different than mine because we have personality differences, we can figure out, well, how do we best, accommodate that and work together. So we find them very powerful, and we use them in team settings. Like I said, we also use them in the recruiting process, and not necessarily to rule out people or rule people in. And I know, like predictive index, and there's some that say, that they'll look at, specific strengths. Myers-Briggs does not do that, but it tells us, how are they going to operate on our team, and where where there might be some differences, and some of those differences are good. Some of those differences are going to be, how do they fit culturally with us? So we just use it for a lot of different insights. Any other uses, or why you see firms using personality assessments, Samantha? You want to add to that?
Yeah, I think you're spot on in that they're trying to see, are they going to be a fit on the team? Is it a culture fit, or are they just going to jive in there? And I think part of it is like what you're saying, is that we actually want to be looking at it for diversity of the approach. If we get too much of like ourselves, then we can develop some glaring weaknesses on our teams. If we have a team of all highly analytical, logical people, and we don't have as many that can see through the data and through the weeds to be able to see those bigger pictures, and we don't have people that focus on that, then our team as a whole is going to struggle with growth, with innovation, with where our practice and our profession is going. And so I think there's where we might look at it to see where there's similarity of how it fits in. I think we should also be looking at it to see where there's differences, because that can really help with the longevity and the success of our practices.
Yes, I think that's a really good point. It starts to identify some potential gaps, that we might have. So awesome. Well, so you just made me think, one of the ways that we use it is to identify, so I think the areas that we focus on the most is, how do we communicate? What's our preference for communication? How do we approach decisions and making decisions? How do we organize our work? How do we organize our life, or don't, in the case of some personalities?
Yes.
Some personalities prefer it to be more loose, flexible, where other personalities are more rigid, maybe stringent. I like the checklist. I like to check things off my checklist. I like a good to-do list. And so I think if we look in those areas, that's one of the ways that we use them, and we work on gaining that understanding and empathy in our team. And just to give you an example, so in the accounting and consulting profession, we're a very date-driven profession. So we choose a date, deadlines and date-driven, profession. And Jay's on the Myers-Briggs, the judging side, likes to line up the dates. Here's what we're going to get done, and this is the order it's going to get done, and be pretty linear about it. So that, is pretty effective in the deadlines, except it never goes that way. And so there's always going to be emergencies, or the client needs something else, or the client doesn't get us our stuff, or somebody is sick, or we have changes in priorities. And so we have to have that flexibility, which the P or the perceiving can bring in. And, the flip side is Ps, because they would prefer just to leave things kind of loose, might struggle with deadlines or due dates. We were facilitating a workshop many years ago with the entire firm. And, the managing partner and a couple partners were like, well, I don't think there should be any Ps in the accounting profession. And I would like to say, I beg to differ, because of what Samantha just said is we have some holes in there. And in that case, one of the holes might be flexibility. And, Ps can bring that flexibility. And I'm a P, and I used to manage our project, scheduling. And you could say, how do you do that when you're not linear? Because I don't get attached to it has to be this way. I can see where things fit and move them and be okay with that, where a J might give you heartburn about it. But we have to do both. So I think that's the point. We have to accommodate both.
Well, and it's like you said, too, is that it's not fixed. We can see very early on that we have tendencies, right? As a child, my mother was like, oh my gosh, the world is not black and white, Samantha. And so as you get older and you work with other people, like you said, I'm a J, I'm good with that. I recognize working with Ps and some high Ps that drive me nuts, because we made a decision, let's go. And now you're pulling back on me and you're saying, but did you consider this? And did you look at that? And what that's taught me is extremely valuable, because we do have to be able to flex. And so that's a wonderful thing about where we have these personality types that can be opposites in, when we aren't familiar with the strength that brings, we can look at it as an irritant, and we can look at it as a rub. But when I have the understanding of where you're coming from and how you think differently, all of a sudden I can appreciate what you can bring to the table. If I'm a highly logical, highly analytical person, I can deliver messages that can come across as extremely blunt, non-caring, look like I have no compassion, which I don't see much in the profession. It's an incredibly compassionate profession, but yet our personality can very much lead to the way we present ourselves as not being that way. So if I work with somebody that's better at being able to observe that, be able to be more cognizant of people's feelings, and I collaborate with them, we actually can have some better communication, we can have some better connection, and we can avoid some of these mistakes that just purely happen because we're talking past each other. We're just not recognizing how the other person is perceiving that. And so that's the beautiful thing, is that we're not locked into that personality type. We can learn from each other. And as we have talked about before, we can't blame our issues on our personality type and say, well, this is the way I was born, this is the way I am. No, that's not the scapegoat. Right. We're absolutely capable of adapting, and we have to. It's just the world we're in.
Yes. Yeah, our personality does not get us off the hook. So we're not, while it's wired, while it's in your DNA, it also does not, it's not a scapegoat. It's not, something that we can use to blame. Instead, we have to say, how do we use it to collaborate and complement each other? which
Yes.
I think is the biggest value. And if we know that, I mean, I think, we figure that out. You could be listening to this going, well, we kind of figured that out, or we know that. Yes, over time, we learn about that. This can escalate it. It can make it faster for us to understand, each other's personalities and how we can, best work together, and how we complement each other. And so like a client that I might have that might be a J, like Samantha, I'm a P. I know they want to know what the timeline is. They want to know where we are against the timeline. So I manage my communications against that. So my recaps or my project planning or my, phone calls, it's like, this is what we're going to get done. We have an agenda, and it makes us better anyway. It makes me stop to do the thinking and the planning for it. And then it makes them feel more comfortable because they know where we are. And so that's just another, simple example of how we can, best facilitate that.
Yes. And I think what some people do, how you started this with why we're discussing this topic, is because people are looking at it as maybe as a hiring agent or putting people on teams. And I think it's really important to realize there is no right or wrong. There isn't a type. There is a type that we do tend to see in accounting.
Yeah.
However, what we have noticed is that type is broadening. Because when we're looking at the advancement of advisory services in accounting, we are absolutely seeing more personality types than the typical that we see. So with Myers-Briggs, it's very common we see that ST and J, that sensing, that thinking, that judging is very common. However, what we are absolutely noticing is that we are starting to get more feeling people in there, and we are starting to get more intuitives showing up in the future leaders. And again, it really goes to show some of that new skill, or maybe not skill, but just assets that diverse personalities can bring to the table, especially as we're evolving our services. So just for hiring managers to be very mindful that this is not a tool to use and say, I'm looking for this mold, this personality type. That's definitely not what you're going to use this for.
Right.
And anybody that is going to use this as a hiring tool, that person really needs some training on it too. There's been stories of managers just making the mistakes of how they try to apply this in a hiring. So if you do have hiring managers using it, make sure you give them some good training before you let them loose on the tool.
Yeah, and some of the ideas, on the training, or maybe some pitfalls that we see people make, is that they use, personalities as a hammer, or a pigeonhole, versus how do I collaborate? How do I leverage, the different personalities, which is what we want to tap into. And we want to be able to do that. If I understand that, then I can figure out how do I best do that. An example is, often, so Samantha said, the common accounting personality type is STJ. I want lots of data. I'm very black and white. My communication is the T, the thinking, black and white. It's the right, or wrong. It's objective. And then the J is very structured and linear, where E and I, the extrovert and introvert, are 50-50 in the accounting profession. And so I could have extroverts that are, we're like, our meetings are crickets. Nobody speaks up. It's the same two people that speak. My bet is they're extroverts, and probably high extroverts that can't be comfortable, that are not comfortable with silence. And so the introverts are over there processing, because that's what they do first, is they internalize it and then vocalize, or then get into action, where extroverts vocalize and are in action and then they internalize it. So it's opposite, literally. And we're like, why is nobody else speaking? Well, we have to figure out, how do we give them the opportunity to process, ahead of time with an agendas or reading material to kind of warm them up. Can we pause and let them think, let them internalize it and then respond, and be okay with that pause, be comfortable with that, not go first. And then we have to say, introverts, you need to get in there, and you can just say, hey, I agree with that. Hey, I'm having this thought. I'm wondering about this. I don't have to have it all formulated, right there, but I got to get in there and find my way. We like to say, like, elbow your way in, so that you can get your unique viewpoint and your unique, perspective heard and as part of the meeting. And we all say to each other, there's no dumb question. We all probably have a similar question or are having similar thoughts. But for an introvert or a high introvert, I really have to, process it. So I have to be able to facilitate that.
Absolutely. And what you can also do for those introverts, because I am one, so absolutely identify. And you can say, what, can we go back to that previous topic? That's okay. And so if you're leading that meeting or you are that extrovert and you're leading that meeting, give that allowance, be mindful of things like that. And it goes exactly to what we're saying, that when we use these personality types, it really gives us awareness. It creates self-awareness so that I know, just like what you were saying, okay, these are strategies I need to practice, right? These are things I need to go work on. And then it also gives those that are working with you, again, you use the word empathy, but I also can use strategies. How will I get these people more engaged? How do I feel like I'm not, speaking into a void and nobody else participates? Or, I put all these systems and processes together and nobody else on my team follows them. Everybody does something different. It's all these things that during our work day, and we spend so many hours there, where we just can sometimes feel like I'm misunderstood. Or as a coachee I was just recently talking to said, he was on a team and he said, I felt like I stuck out like a sore thumb. I felt like I didn't fit at all. And it's those kinds of things that, man, he had such talent and he brought such uniqueness to the services that they could provide to clients. But because they didn't understand that type and embrace what he brought to the table, he left. And it purely was because he felt like he couldn't jive. He couldn't connect at all with anybody there. Mm-hmm. And when we're dealing with right now, so many firms being cautious of losing people and making sure that they're retaining the staff that they have and who else they can bring on board, it's an unnecessary reason to have to lose somebody.
Yes. Well, and I want to piggyback on something you said a moment ago about, the shift in our services and moving more towards advisory and consulting, and that, that innovation, that ability to think outside the box, the ability to say, I see something out there and then figure out how to do it, where, typical CPAs or typical S personalities, I want to have a lot of the data figured out before I move in that direction. That's another place that can be so complementary. We're looking at, building these advisory services, and there's an advisory mindset or approach that we can learn from, where it's innate in people. And we do think you can learn from it. Just because we said this is how you're wired, your DNA, we also said we can, adapt, we can moderate, we can learn some of those approaches. We can practice how to, ask questions and visioning. We practice visioning. That's one of the leadership attributes that we work a lot with in our transformational leadership program is, what is your vision? And being able to articulate it. If I'm a high N on Myers-Briggs, I'm able to see that and articulate that more so than I am an S, where I want to pull all the data together. Mm-hmm. So as we're moving towards those advisory services and advisory skills that we're looking for, those are the personalities, like you said, Samantha, are showing up in the profession more. And so we can also then say, how do we learn? How do we learn from them? How do we, adapt that? How do we, practice some of the strategies to be able to do that? Samantha and I were just kicking off our client advisor program today. And that's one of the things that we talk about. And some of the folks were saying, I overthink it, or I feel like I don't have, all the solutions all buttoned up. I can't go check, PPC, or I can't go check, any of the, standards, to make sure it all lines up. We're innovating on the spot and collaborating with our clients. So you do have to be flexible also to be able to do that. But we can practice it. And that's the beauty of it. That's how we love using, personality assessments, to say, gosh, how do we start to learn that?
Oh, yeah, I can't agree more. And people get excited about it. I think it's a little nerve-wracking if they're going through the assessment because they're a little afraid of how it's being used. But as you said, these are tools that we use with leadership coaching and so forth. And I was just recently in one where we did it for a firm, and watching their senior managers and their directors getting their assessment and comparing notes and starting to identify, this is why we get along in that meeting, and that's what's wrong with you. And they were saying it jokingly, like, that's what's wrong with you, but there were these big ahas
Right.
going off, and it's a really great team building experience too, because it really does create a lot of that. And I mean, even just sharing personally, I said I'm an introvert, and for years I've worked with people that are like, yeah, right, you're an introvert. No, 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 really, I am. And going through this and seeing where my natural inclinations are, people are like, oh my gosh, okay, well, that explains some of this other stuff because we really think you're over on this side of the spectrum. And so it's a really great team building, and with firms trying so hard to create some of that energy and rapport and so forth right now with how hard they've been working. It's a fun and different way to do it.
Yeah, and it does build that camaraderie. I think it's important to do that. And this, just like everything else we say, you can pilot it. Try it if you have never, done this within the firm. Pick a small, group or practice group area to start, with, and have them each individually do it, and then hold a team meeting and define it and share. Like Samantha was talking about, what insights you have. The ahas are incredible. When we start to go, oh my gosh, no wonder you don't use your calendar. Or, oh my gosh, no wonder you get all stressed out, if you don't have the agenda, in front of you, or why we have crickets on our team. It really does. And then there's actions I can take, which is the powerful piece of it. But we can start small. You can take one and try it, and practice it and have some discussions around it. We wouldn't just have you take assessments or have people take assessments and then not ever talk about it. You want to make sure that it's out there. You're talking about it. You talk about how to use it, how not to use it, what insights we can have, and where it fits. And even like you'll start to see connections with your clients. So you do it as a team. Your clients don't have their personality assessments, complete. You'll start to see how they're operating more readily. And then I can figure out, how do I best accommodate my clients too, or my referral relationships or partnerships that we might have. We can start to figure out, how do we adapt. It affects personal also. You'll see insights with your spouse and your kids and your siblings and your best friend, even without them doing it, because you have that understanding and you see other people operating in certain ways, and you're like, oh, that's why that's happening. So the empathy goes way up. In emotional intelligence, EQ, is something that we've been talking a lot about. We've been reading about in the profession, and in business in general. And those with higher EQ are more successful. And this is one of the tools, to help us, achieve that, and to build that EQ and build that empathy. So it's super fun. And we encourage you to explore it if you haven't. If you have questions, for us about it, you can let us know. And if there's specific tools that you're using, we're always interested, because we're always learning. We'd love to hear how you've been using them as well. So you can, share with us in social media, reply to this HR Huddle, reach out to us and just connect with us. We'd love to do that. So thanks for exploring this with me today, Samantha. I appreciate it.
Oh, my pleasure. So happy to do it.
Have a great week, everybody. Thank you.